So, hi everybody, I'm John. And I wanted to ask some questions briefly about, not briefly, about your work, to talk about, I guess the main question that everyone wanting to asking me is what's the difference between monotype and monoprint? And we do both, so, you know, there's a mixed media work too. And so I really, over the years for other people, but then in June I did read the show at Essex Art Association, and I got one of the so I wanted to get in touch with you again to really see about your work. So anyway, I guess we could start with that question.
Okay. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming out on such a not so nice day. I really appreciate people coming today. And yeah, all the work in this show pretty much is monotype. I also do work in several other mediums, but we wanted a cohesive body of work, so I brought these landscapes, which I've been working on from probably around 2016. Before that, I did almost exclusively abstract work. But then I moved to Old Lyme. I was living in Wallingford and I do my work in New Haven. I've been a student at Creative Arts Workshop for 25 years or so. And my teacher, Barbara Harder, is here in the audience and has taught me a lot. So that's my New Haven connection. But I moved to Old Lyme, and suddenly I was, you know, in the birthplace of American Impressionism, and the gallery there focused on representational art, and I wanted to be a part of my own community. And I always loved the landscape form, so I started concentrating more on landscapes. It was also the year of the presidential election, and there was just a lot of kind of upsetting news happening and voices in our heads and a lot of just negativity. And I find I wanted these landscapes just to be kind of a respite from all of that, like just a quiet place. And they're not necessarily real places, even though Old Lyme has gorgeous rivers and marshes. There's only really one or two works here that reflect that. The others are mountains, because I love mountains. I fell in love with mountains a long time ago. But to get back to Jonas's original question, monotype is a form of printmaking that's actually pretty challenging, but I sort of fell in love with the process partly for that reason, because you can't control it too much. You're never directly making marks on a you know, you're not painting or drawing on the surface. It's a transfer process. So you're using a plate. In the case of monotypes, I use a smooth piece of plexiglass that has nothing cut into it or etched into it like a wood block would, or a copper etching where you could re-ink the plate and get multiples. I mean, usually the purpose of printmaking is, you know, to get multiples, but the monotype is an outlier. It's really, I hate to even call them prints, because then people get the idea that, oh, there's a lot of these, but they're one of a kind. It's called the painterly print, and it's more like a painting on paper. The difference between a monotype and a monoprint, there is a difference, and people frequently confuse the two terms and get it incorrect. A monoprint is a work that is using a plate or a substrate or a grid or something that has a repeating element on it, but that when you make the works, you're inking it up differently every time, or you're adding or subtracting something to it. So you still wind up with a one-of-a-kind work. The piece on the very end there is a mono print. I think that's really the only one I could say here that I have today here that is. So I have other works that use that plate that I made, where you see the dark colors inked up. I inked it up like an etching, where you press the ink into it and then wipe away, and the smooth surface, you wipe the ink away entirely. But then on each of the prints, I varied the background. So some of them are more like dawn, some are more like dusk, some have pink and purple. I'm showing a couple of these around the state right now, actually. But that's wonderful because, I mean, it's exciting to get something I can get more than one of, because usually I don't do that. I don't know if you wanted to ask me something else. I can talk about,
No.
Go ahead.
Well, no, but what you're saying is, as far as the use so these are actually one-time pieces, essentially, meaning monotype or monoprint, in both cases. Is that correct?
Well, they're one of a kind.
One of a kind.
It doesn't mean that they're created with one pass of the press. That was actually a misconception I had myself for a long time, because I took a class, you know, I was working in Hartford, living in Wallingford, running down to New Haven. I had like 2 hours to work and then clean up and get out of the parking garage before it closed. And I would put everything on the plate and run it through, and 9 times out of 10, I didn't get something that worked. And then after I retired and I was able to take a daytime class with Barbara, she kind of made me realize, no, you can take it slowly. You can build the image. So we start with something and we see how that looks, and then we want to add a little something here or there. You go back to your plate. Of course, you have to keep in mind everything is reversed. That's why I'm saying it's tricky and challenging, and sometimes, so again, it's hard to visualize if you've never seen it in action. But you have your plate with all the ink on it, and I use stencils a lot. You'll see these mountains are made by cutting out a clear or kind of cloudy plastic film called Denryl or vellum, or what's the other word? I don't know. Like acetate. It's just a plastic film that I make the stencils out of, so I can use them over and over again. I can clean them and use them again. And you put the paper on top, it goes through the press. When you lift that paper off, it's really a revelation. It's really like, maybe you got what you thought you were gonna get, and maybe you didn't. Maybe you don't like it. So you go in and try to keep working the image and building it. It's difficult and not like painting in that you can't cover up something that you don't like, and you can't scrape it off. Even the most opaque ink is not entirely opaque. You can't cover it up. So sometimes you have to embrace happy accidents, and I wanted to talk about that vertical piece there. But I was
from the
mountain I called Daybreak, or Daybreak Lake.
The second one from
the big one.
The tall one. Okay.
That was kind of inspired by the Japanese woodcut artists that did the 38 views of Mount Fuji outside. Anyway, when I was working on that piece, and Barbara will remember, the blue areas, they weren't supposed to have that white, what looks like clouds. I mean, that wasn't intended. We couldn't figure out for the life of us what was happening there. We never did figure it out. We wiped the plastic sheeting, didn't seem to be anything on there, but it just wouldn't print solid. And then one of my classmates came over and said, hey, I really like the way you did those clouds in there. And I was like, oh yeah? Okay, yeah.
You captured the reality, and maybe without
even intending to. It became something different.
Really,
so that's why I say it evolves. The piece kind of starts telling you what it wants to be. And you really have to surrender yourself sometimes to those kind of things that are going to happen when you put the work through the press. Because you don't have your hands on it then. It's like leaving it up to chance. But I kind of like that for some reason, so.
It has, well, that's what I was saying, how that might be somewhat like magically captured, but I mean, your work essentially has, certainly, that one in particular to me, which I used on the invitation, and several other ones that are here, the gray mountains as well, have a certain, for me, it's a kind of an illumination, you know, that you're not seeing, even though it's an abstract landscape, or not a real landscape in that sense, but the light itself is real, and like you perceive that in the way they captured it. You know? And that's what I saw in your work up in Essex, the same thing. You know, when there's something really going on way inside that painting image, even though it was a print.
Mm.
You know?
Well, there's some things you can do with, these are done with oil-based printing inks that maybe can't be accomplished with paint. One of the things I love to do that you see in a lot of these is what we call the rainbow roll, where you put out several colors of ink, like say in that one with Jonas. The last two, really all of those last three. And you take your brayer with, say, 3 colors of ink, and then you keep going in one direction as you're inking up your plate, or your palette rather, and you move it slightly to the left and the right, and the colors blend so beautifully, and you get that gradient. And I've really fallen in love with that because it's something maybe not easily achievable with paint, but it also produces that luminous quality you're talking about. Yeah.
This one, right? Which has
That
a very
one
soft.
and the one
Looks like a
next to
soft
it.
pastel, but it's really like a soft light.
So, yeah, they just come out
That's the way it came out.
with a kind of a calm, spiritual sort of feeling, and that's all I'm trying to attain. I like to say I'm not trying to solve the world's problems with my art or necessarily tell a story. I mean, Magda has got a lot of that storytelling going on, so I think this is a nice pairing, and I'm going to let you.
That's why I thought about your work too. It has, you know, there's something more in politically intuitive, I'll say, in terms of not trying to, why you just mentioned that point about not trying to save the world. There's something illuminated in your work that is vision. It's not just visionary, it's something, you know, future.
Thank you. I'm glad you see that.
And also in Magda's work, and where the structures that Magda has been developing and working with are actually intuitive, I think, too, for a long time. And so, how would you describe it? Let me ask you.
I just want to add that when I asked who's going to be my partner in the gallery, Jonas said, oh, there's a lady who makes these beautiful prints who are also mystical, meditative and mystical. So I said, okay, that's fine. We'll go. Okay. So just briefly about my background. I wasn't born in this country. I came here at 19. I went to the School of Ceramics. They told me you cannot do ceramics in New York City. You have to go to California if you want to continue with ceramic. But why don't you try textiles? So I became a textile designer. And eventually I was able to write an essay for school, and they took me on scholarship to Queen's College, and I got my degrees. Eventually I was trying to become a school teacher. I didn't pass math, so I wrote another essay, and they accepted me to another school. This was called Wisdom University. It was in Oakland, California, and it was much more focused on spiritual training and philosophy. And our president was a former Dominican monk who left the order. So, you know, they were quite rebellious as far as the conventional religion was concerned.
I could ask you.
Ask me the question now.
Because
yeah.
well, just to lead into where you're going, I think, as you mentioned, that you had discovered the existence of cosmic geometry, and you said that it permeates the whole universe. That's quoting you. So I'm interested in how you could expand on that, because
Okay.
Intertwining geometry.
Okay, so we had this professor, Sondra Barry, I still remember her name, who showed us the pictures, photographs of the vines, fermenting vines under the microscope. You wouldn't believe what a beautiful geometric forms and structures they are. And then she was biochemist, and then she also showed us pictures of the cytoskeleton, which is a part of our molecules, right? Our cells. And that's a little part which adjusts to our emotions in their structure. I don't really know now. There is, what's his name? Not Norman Freeman, Morgan Freeman is narrating a wonderful show. It used to be called, the series of shows started about the Earth, and now it is about the cosmos, how actually anything that happened in cosmos, eons ago, still has influence on, for example, hibernation of the bears, or on penguins finding their mates, things like that. So we are literally, created from the stardust, and there has been a cosmic geometry which is permeating everything, guiding everything. So. It's, I always felt, when I learned all this, it's much better to think about, universe having a network than being empty, cold space. And I thought, well, it's even better because I see it more or less as a trampoline. There's some netting, but you can spring on it back and forth. You can visit the universe and you can come back enriched and kind of feel much more comfortable in your skin right here. So my paintings are a little bit about this, and I think I would like to get up and just read quickly what they are. I would start from the end if you don't mind, because so this picture is about the little boy who is standing against the wall, and it's actually a picture inspired by some magazine photo. And he's observing people playing basketball or whatever it is. There is another boy who is kind of trying to fit into the game. He's balancing the ball on his head and aware of his own potential to connect the heaven and earth by participating in the creative energy of a teamwork. So, it's about the fact, since we do have the stardust within ourselves, we certainly must be capable of bringing the heaven on earth, right? Whatever the heaven is, we don't know. But it's probably a state of much more superior harmony than we are experiencing on earth right now, at least. Yeah. Okay, so the second one is, it's called the pattern which connects. It could also be called healing pattern. This painting has been inspired by a deep realization of the existing benevolent geometric patterns permeating all creation, which is underlying the entire painting. The scene describes the violent natural or military disaster, which brings fear, suffering, and even death to the people present. The military is called to solve the problem, but the backs of the nearing soldiers are gradually changing into the targets instead. So you see little squares here, like soldiers waiting to shoot their guns, but they are slowly but surely turning into the targets themselves. However, as the evolution continues, from the targets spring out the butterflies who have all the freedom and beauty, and can begin a new cycle. And while all the suffering people here are being relieved or released to the spiritual world. So
can I ask you a question before you go further?
Yeah.
I love your texture. How is that done? Can you,
Layers.
And how the layer applied? Is it acrylic or spray?
Well, you have to put this delaying medium into your paint so that it is transparent. You have to work quickly. I was always very fond of watercolors in school, So it's not a problem for me, but you can also you just simply, develop the picture as you go. You have probably some idea in your mind, but by layering, it comes out, and you can also make a mistake. For example, I've never seen these under the normal lights, and I just wanted them too dark on them because I don't have very good light in my bedroom. So there's a way to lighten it up. Now you have to use the more opaque paints, and to put maybe the waterfalls will be much lighter, or they are not halos, by the way. I'll explain what they are, and make it a little more contrasting. It's like in the middle of the night.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is I don't know. Do you want to go into poetry or not?
Whatever you'd like to talk about, please.
Do you want me to go
That's
into
fine.
poetry? Okay, it's based on the poem by Persian
called Dilating.
poet Hafiz.
But what's it?
Circle after. Here we go.
Okay.
So Hafiz was a 14th century poet. He was follower of Rumi. He
Later.
was a baker's son, very poor, but very talented. So he was able to gain some patronage of the nobility, but he was so controversial that he was changing his patronage quite often. As another poet, I just make this long story short, Ayat Khan said, the mission of Hafiz was to express to a fanatical religious world that the presence of God is not to be found in heaven, but here on earth in the most ordinary experiences of everyday life. Okay, so this one is called Circles, and I'm going to read you the poem. Circles. The moon is most happy when it is full, and the sun always looks like a perfectly minted gold coin that was just polished and placed in flight by God's playful kiss. And so many varieties of fruit hang plump and round from branches that seem like sculptor's hands. I see the beautiful curve of a pregnant belly shaped by a soul within, and the earth itself, and the planets, and the spheres. I have gotten the hint. There is something about circles the beloved likes. Hafiz, within the circle of a perfect one, there is an infinite community of light. So it's a very positive poem for somebody who was writing in the 14th century. And so all these things, fruits, pregnant belly, planets. I wasn't sure how to connect with the lower part with the upper. And so I was playing with what would be the clouds, that kind of acquired humanoid forms. Okay, so I left it there. And I forgot to mention that actually it is, there's an undercurrent of the pattern, which is also indication of the cosmic geometry, kind of permeating everything on heaven and earth and connecting us. Okay, so this is story about St. Francis. Now, of course, we recognize traditionally saints with the halos around them. They were kind of vibrations which kind of is obviously made up, although there are some people who are able to see the auras. But these are actually cymatic patterns, which are, again, it's when matter is taking form, and cymatic patterns, Jonas knows what it is. When, for example, you are freezing water, if you have positive emotions, you achieve beautiful patterns. When your emotions are chaotic, the result is very chaotic. And it goes, for anything in nature, for any matter in nature, in any state, if it's liquid or if it's material or if it's gas, can be formed into these more or less visible, depends what you are looking at, you are using for it into forms. So there's nothing, there are no accidents in nature. Everything is there already. So I don't know, does anybody know briefly the story of St. Francis? You do? Okay, so quickly, St. Francis is a young boy, was son of a wealthy merchant. In order to gain nobility, one had to not only be able to buy one's clothing, but to go to the battle, but also participate in it, went to the battle, didn't like it, returned home prematurely because he was ill. In one of his feverish states, he heard God tell him, rebuild my home, rebuild my house. And so, young Francis assumed it's probably one of the broken chapels around, in his neighborhood. So he gathered a group of his friends and they went to rebuild the chapel. However, the brotherhood was growing, and that was something that Rome didn't really like. But the wise Pope invited the whole group to his court, and when Francis explained what it was and then what he heard, Pope realized that it was maybe something little deeper, and he realized that it wasn't about building the actual material structure. It was about rebuilding the church, to make it more spiritual, more concerned with the poor people, or improvement of education and all that originally church, or not originally, but from time to time, church was actually aspiring. Okay, he was also a friend of the, he lived in the wilderness, was a friend of the animals, he tamed them, so this is his favorite wolf. He was washing the bodies of the lepers and helping them. But mainly, this is a tribute of all the people who are taking care of the people, COVID patients. So it's more about the democracy of the sainthood than about superiority of anyone who is saint. We all have a capacity to be saints, and we definitely all have capacity to help others. Okay, so here is St. Francis, and this one, well, okay, let's go this because it's one I want to say for the end. So this one is keeping in touch, and it's, I went also into the study of shamanism, and so I realized that all these imprints in the caves, people would put their hands like for signature, and they would spit the paint, and you got these imprints in the caves. So this could be considered signatures of their ancestors. So he brings his daughter and whatever granddaughter to the cave, and while all beings are connected through the auras, the shaman also seems to be suggesting the need for a better balance of the masculine and feminine energies. You can see this only when you come really close, because he has, some pointing shapes here, and these are all just circular. So, because in the future there will have to be better balance between the masculine and feminine, I believe. In his wisdom, he is sending some angular pointers toward these girls in order to better balance their all-around feminine energies. Take it or leave it, that's what I did. Okay, this is called Guardians of Evolution. This painting describes the different stages of the evolution of the human consciousness. The black and white group in the center represents the fight or flight minds of the early warriors. So if you come close, okay, so this is the battle. This is the battle scene. The lighter sepia here of mass on the upper left was already warming up to the idea of mutual support and affection. The third colorful group on the bottom suggests a carnival. During such events, people often mock death and try to hide or remove all skeletons before the